the question of Islam is a worldwide one, because in the world there are about 1.5 billion Muslims. The Middle East is a minority of them, because people think Islam is the Middle East. No, most of Islam is not in the Middle East. It's in Asia, in farther away. In the Middle East, there are about 350 million Arabs, mostly Arabs. And they are only 1/5 of the Islamic world. Only 1 of every 5 Muslims is Arab. And therefore you'll find that most of Islam is outside the Middle East. For example, in the Indian subcontinent alone, there are about 500 million Muslims. In India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, you have about 150 million in each. So between the 3 of them, you have already about 500 million. And so it's enormous quantities of Muslims in that part of the world. And then you have Indonesia. This is the largest Islamic country. There are about 220 million Muslims in one country. It's the largest Muslim country in the world, and other countries all over the place. Now, when we speak about these radical Islamic groups, you can find them all over the globe. We speak mostly about those of the Middle East because they are the most troublemakers, like the ISIS that we talk about and so on. But there are many other troublemakers in other parts of the world. For example, we hear about the Boko Haram in Africa, and we hear about the Shabab in Somalia, and we speak about Lashkar Taiba in India, Pakistan, and about the Taliban in Afghanistan. So these groups are everywhere. We just concentrate on those of the Middle East. Now, all those groups, and there are many of them, you can differentiate between many groups. First of all, there are countries which are themselves radical Muslim countries. You have, for example, Iran, where the government is radical. It's like, you don't say about Germany today that it is Nazi. It's not a Nazi country, but there is a Nazi or neo-Nazi group in Germany. But the government is against it, and they are fighting it. Unlike the 30s, where the government was Nazi. This is the difference. So Iran, that's the government. It's not an Islamic group which is like Lashkar Taiba or Boko Haram, which is fought by the governments. That is the government itself. And the same in Sudan. It's also a fundamentalist Muslim group, which is Islamic. And that's the government. You have the case of Saudi Arabia, which is a very special case, because in terms of domestic politics, they are also very radical, like Iran and like Sudan. But the only difference is that they don't use violence in the outside. At least not the government. Individuals do. For example, those who did September 11 in America were for the most part Saudis. So Saudi individuals do those things, but the government is against them. And that's the difference between Saudi Arabia and Sudan or Iran, where the governments are themselves radical movement. Now, apart from that, those countries which exist and they are recognized and they are part of the UN and everything, you have what I would like to call countries or states in the making. That is to say, groups who are declaring themselves like states but in fact they are not states because they are not recognized by anybody. A case, for example, is Hamas. Hamas in the Middle East within the Palestinians. They took over part of the Palestinian territory, the Gaza Strip, and they are ruling it in practice. But there is no Hamas state. Something like that is not recognized. It is being run in practice as a state. And the same thing in Boko Haram, for example, in Nigeria. Again, there is no Boko Haram state. They took part of Nigeria in the northeast and they are ruling it in practice. The same thing in Mali. There was also a takeover movement, it's called Azawad, and also they declared a state in practice, although again it's not a state. So that kind of thing, that kind of group exists in many places and which rules a territory in practice as if it were a state, although it is not a state. And that's the difference between that kind of thing and the states which are themselves fundamentalists, like Iran and Sudan, that we said before. Now, there are also other groups which do not declare a state, and although we don't declare a state, they are a movement of rebellion against the government. And for example, in Syria today, there is it's a civil war. It's already going on for 4 years, and there are all kinds of movements fighting against the government. Some of them are Muslim fundamentalists. One of them is called Jabhat al-Nusra, which means the front of victory, and they are declaring themselves that they want to remove the government of Syria, Assad, and create their own government. But they don't declare a different state. It's not a different state. It's a group of rebels within Syria which wants to replace the government with another government. So you see, there are all kinds of differences. Hezbollah is again very special case in Lebanon. Hezbollah is a political party within Lebanon. They did not declare that they want to take over Lebanon, or they want to change the government in Lebanon. They want just to dictate to the Lebanese government what to do, although the Hezbollah is a minority. But because they have the force of arms, they control the Lebanese government, and they are backed by Syria and by Iran. So you see, every movement of these Muslim radicals has a different view or a different purpose in life. Now, of course, the most interesting for us is ISIS. I come to it. Again, ISIS does not found or start a new territory or new state. They took half of Syria and half of Iraq, both of which are under rebellion and civil war and turmoil and so on and so forth. They control those areas that those states cannot control by themselves, and they declared that it is their state. They are not citizens of Syria or of Iraq. They come from all over the area. They have their own chief, the Caliph Abu Bakr, and they declare that anybody who comes and fights for them will go to heaven because it's fighting jihad for the cause of Islam. And they are very successful. They were very successful until now. And the fact is that there are thousands of Muslims from all over the world, including Europe and including Sweden, who come volunteer to fight for them. And you ask yourself, why should they do that? They live in Europe in relative security and prosperity. Why do they need to put themselves in danger by coming and fighting for those people and so on? And the idea is because this movement suggests or offers to the young people the purity of Islam, Islam as it was during the time of the Prophet Muhammad. And the idea is very attractive because here they are not only talking about making an Islamic state, but they are going back to the example of the Prophet of 1400 years ago. And the idea is very, very attractive to young people, and that's the reason why these people come. Now, of course, when they started to conquer territory last summer, they were very successful. Within 6 months, they occupied half Syria and half Iraq, which are large countries. But since America, together with some Arab countries and some European countries, started to act against them, their success has been more limited because they don't have an air force. And America and the others have an air force. They are bombing. They are bombing them, and that had some effect on the pace of advance of their troops. And so that's where it stands today. That's the reason why I put it within the states in the making. I mean, the state is declared, it's there. The cities that they control are governed by them. They have their own courts of law, their own Islamic system, their own economy. They even minted their own coins belonging to that Islamic state of the caliphate. That means that they have every intention to continue until they become a worldwide thing. And one sign of the success, their success, is the fact that the Boko Haram, for example, in Africa, and a group of fundamentalists in Sinai, you mentioned that, they declared loyalty to the caliph who sits there in Syria and Iraq. That is to say that the idea of that state goes beyond the local Iraq and Syria into the wide Islamic world. And the more these movements and territories which are declared their loyalty to this state, so the bigger the state will be. So it can be a very long battle, or maybe if America decides to put troops into the field in order to fight against them, maybe they can fight them. But I am very much in doubt. Let's see how it's going to develop. But this is more or less the situation today, because there are various movements. Most of them don't like America, the West, or the moderate Arab state, because they say they are making a coalition with the West, and therefore they don't like them, like the Gulf states and so on. But they have a lot of energy, apparently, a lot of volunteers coming from the outside, and a lot of money, because when they fight, they take over, first of all, oil-producing areas, and they sell that oil with black market at half the price. The Turks, for example, buy all that, and then they sell it in the real price. So everybody does good business, and they have the capacity to maintain the state that they are maintaining. Well, now there are, of course, other Islamic movement. For example, even in China, in northwest China, Xinjiang, there is a movement of Turks, Uyghurs it's called, Uyghur minority. They are also rebelling against the Chinese government, and they want to separate from China and so on and so forth. But their chances are so small because China will not give them up. China is not Syria or Iraq. They will crush them exactly as they did with Tibet. Tibet also rose in rebellion and so on, but nothing it held. So you see this it's contagious. These movements that when they start somewhere, they are copied in other places where they want to say, and that's the reason why one has the impression that the Islamic world is in turmoil. There is no stability. You cannot predict what will happen tomorrow, and so on and so forth. I think that's more or less.